Hello and welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be that mediocre. I'm Sarah Muliati with RELATECASTS, and we're filling in for Rick and Susan. They'll be back next week.
I'm Harold Muliati with RELATECASTS, and we've got an exciting guest for you today. Well, let's run our intro and we'll introduce her. So today we've got for you Terry Spehar-Fahey. She's a fine artist. She's got horses. She does all kinds of things. We know Terry actually from California Lutheran University. I took some classes with her, but I like to tell her that she does just about everything at that college, I think. So, Terry, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did your art career start?
My art career. My students always ask this too, like, how long does it take to make a watercolor painting like you? And I say, well, maybe 2 hours and 45 years. So I've been working at making art since as long as I could remember, probably before I was 5. But seriously, as a watercolor professional, probably 1989. So how many years is that?
That is, I'm not terribly good at math, but I think that's 29 years.
Very close.
And you've done a good number of different and really interesting programs there at the university. Tell us a little bit about your art and psychology program there.
Art and Psych. Well, that's a class that I developed because it was very important to me in my life. And in fact, I got my job at CLU because of artwork that I made while I was in therapy. And lots of people don't like to admit that they've been in therapy because there's still a stigma attached to going to seek help for emotional difficulties. And I wanted to create a class at CLU to help students understand what visual images could do in terms of the healing process when you had emotional difficulties. And I also wanted to destigmatize seeking out therapy. So it's a relatively new class. I've only been teaching it for like the last couple of years, and it's really exciting, and I think the students really appreciate it. I did get my job at CLU because another colleague of mine, Michael Pierce, saw some of the paintings that I did while I was in therapy. And I worked for 8 months with a therapist, and he wasn't an art therapist, but it really helped solidify the issues that I was facing, to be able to look at work and create work from an emotional place and then take that into the therapist's office and have that painting there in front of us that we could talk about and find out, where it came from. So when Michael saw about 3 of them that I had decided I would show about a year and a half after I had finished, it took that much time to actually say, some of this artwork is really creative and it's important, and it just so happened that my friends were running an art show on self-portraits, and these were a lot of self-portraits. So I said, okay, I'll put them out there. And Michael saw the work, and he wanted to meet me so he could find out whether I had any more of them. And when I told him I had 72, he said, do you want a one-woman show at CLU? And that was my introduction to the university, in spite of the fact that I had lived across the street from the university for about 15 years. So we got to talking, and I expressed an interest in possibly teaching classes. I had taught adults, I taught high school, I had a long career as a gallery artist in watercolor, and I felt that I could offer some kind of courses in drawing or watercolor to either the local community college or to California Lutheran University. As it turns out, he needed an adjunct, and that was in August 2006. And so I've been teaching there now for 12 years.
Excellent. And what would you say about watercolor painting in particular? Like, what's unique about watercolor painting compared to other painting media? And what draws you to it?
Well, I'm a watercolorist because the transparency of the washes in combination with the light that reflects off the white paper makes these paintings glow. And even when I was not working as an artist, I'd still go to museums on worldwide travels and look at the watercolors, and they always just were sparkly compared to a lot of oil paintings. The reason I took it up was I was at home with a young child, moved to Thousand Oaks, and needed a social life, and so I decided to take an adult school class in watercolor. Even though I had done a lot of watercolor on my own, I'd never really worked with anybody as a student. So I started in a class in 1988 in Thousand Oaks in adult school, and the teacher happened to be associated with a design firm in Toluca Lake, and she saw my work and saw what I could do and suggested that I get in contact with them as a potential artist in their stable of artists who provided work for hotels such as the Flamingo in Laughlin and Las Vegas. So I did. And at that time, I also was just enthralled with the colors of Thousand Oaks. I had moved from Harbor City, so coming out to Ventura County into the countryside and into a place where Iceland poppies were growing, in the streets. Gorgeous colors. I had to paint those. And so my original starting work was mostly these floral things. And I entered, in 1989, I entered the Thousand Oaks Art Walk with my work. And I won first prize. And that basically said, maybe you've got something here. So keep painting. And I did watercolors because they're such an easy medium to use when you have little kids. You can spread it out and you can work on it for 20 minutes, and then when a child needs you, you can go away and the paint will dry, and then you can come back and layer on top of it. With oils, it may take 30 minutes, 45 minutes just to set your palette up, and the paint always is wet for quite a long period of time, and it takes lots of time to build and develop an oil painting. I can do them, but they just didn't fit into my lifestyle. So I think watercolor is something that a hobbyist can take up, but also a professional can use, and especially one who has a lot of interruptions like I did.
That's interesting because, oil painters like me and Michael Pierce, we tend to think of oil painting as being really easy just because you can kind of go in and change things. But it really, now that you say that, it really does kind of hold you to a certain time frame, whereas watercolor is flexible, I guess, in other ways. Like it's easier to do more of a mixed media kind of thing in it, right? Like you can do pen and ink in addition, and it, like you said, it just dries and then you can work on it later. Yeah.
People are scared of watercolors. They say, oh, you can't make a mistake. Well, that's not really true. Even if you ruin something, it's just a piece of paper.
Yeah.
it's not the end of the world. So this whole fear thing, in my classes, I have to teach students to get over the fear of actually even holding a pencil and drawing, because so many of them have not experienced art making since maybe kindergarten. And we teach our art classes to a lot of the students just to satisfy a general education art requirement. So I don't have fine artists in my classes. But I hope that the students who take my classes, be them watercolor, design, art and psychology, they come away with an appreciation for what an artist does, for some skills looking at visual images and interpreting them, and just hopefully finding some enjoyment of being able to sit down for a couple hours a week and focus on art making, because when you are involved with making a painting, you truly are focused on that one thing.
Yeah. Do you have any like special techniques in your teaching of getting people to be more comfortable with, making mistakes and just, making art?
Special techniques other than yelling at them? No, I don't yell at them. That would be counterproductive. I demonstrate and I encourage, and I think watercolor is a medium where you can be really successful at a beginning level and create an image, especially in a landscape. I'm primarily a landscape painter, although I do figures and such like that. But landscapes are really forgiving. So I think at the very beginning, when the students see, oh, yeah, it's not so hard, I can do that, they start to lose some of that trepidation. We work on techniques, and I'm switching my class up a little this semester and concentrating more on individual techniques before I have them launch into a full-on landscape painting. I think that might help. I do tend to teach design principles and things like that so that they can organize their paintings to make more successful images, but I'm hoping to make them feel a little more comfortable early on in the process.
See, so you have some very exciting interdisciplinary classes that you've been teaching. Can you tell us a bit about those?
When I started at CLU, I taught drawing and a course called Visual Art and Education. My art and psychology class kind of segued out of visual art and education. I was hired for one semester, and I talked to the chair of the department at the time, and I said, I could teach a watercolor class. And that was in spring of 2007. And they let me do it, even though the professor who I was replacing while they were on sabbatical came back. So I kind of weaseled my way into the faculty at Cal Lutheran by saying, you need a watercolor class. Watercolor is not taught at too many universities. So I was kind of thrilled to be able to do this. When I went to UCLA and got my bachelor in art in the 70s, my idea was I was going to be a university professor. But back then in the 70s, I was looking around at the art the university professors were making and what was happening in the art scene, and I realized that that didn't really fit who I was. In fact, I probably should have been born male and 120 years ago, so I could have been like John Singer Sargent, who was one of my heroes. In any case, I said, university professor doesn't seem to be a good fit for me. I think I'll do something else. So it took 30 years, but I finally got to be a university professor, and that's pretty exciting. I wanted to do watercolor, and I remember distinctly at that end of that first semester talking to my students and saying, gee, wouldn't it be neat if I could take students to Venice, Italy and paint in the footsteps of Turner and Sargent, and we'd all go paint while sitting in the canals. And that was the beginning of this investigation and dream into taking students who have studied in a class that we call Imagining Venice. So this summer we just got back from our third trip to Venice, Italy, and to Florence, and we also go to Verona with students. And I teach the class with a colleague of mine, Dru Pagliassotti, and the story about how I found her is quite funny, but maybe we won't go into that. But in any case, the short of it is I basically accosted her and said, "You're going to teach with me, and we're going to Italy. Are you in?" And she said, "Sure. Who are you, crazy woman?" And we've been thick as thieves ever since. So we've done 3 Imagining Venice trips. The first one was in 2011. The weather was hot, just really hot.
Gosh.
The second one was in 2013. The weather was cold, freezing cold, and we had aqua alta. 2013 to 2015 was the third trip. The weather was beautiful. The students were great. The trip was fabulous. But the world has discovered Italy. And the number of tourists traveling in Italy in the summer is unbelievable. So the change between 2013 and 2015, I just like, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. We're wading through knee-deep in tourists and our favorite places, and the places that everybody wants to see. These are, the seat of the Renaissance, the cultural capitals of the world. Everyone in the world wants to go to Italy and see this stuff. But Venice is my love, yes.
And you've got a picture of you and Dru at your Imagining Venice exhibition, I think.
Yes, after, let's see, when did we do this one? I think this was in 2012. I painted a series of watercolors after the trip and had a show at CLU, and this is of us in our Carnivale getup. In the course, we teach students to make papier-mâché masks, so that's my Harlequin Medusa rainbow woman in my hand. And Dru is holding a bauta, a real one from Italy.
So, you mentioned about Sargent being one of your big big heroes, and of course, one of the questions that artists have to answer, several hundred times or several thousand times is,
yes.
Who were your inspirations? So tell us
Who is my inspiration?
Tell us a little bit about, Sargent and your other inspirations and how that's kind of interfaced with your art.
The actual inspiration for Imagining Venice was a Turner painting of the lagoon from the hotel he was staying in. And Turner traveled to Venice 3 times, and they were short trips. He was kind of doing the grand tour in his life, in his art life. He traveled all over Europe looking for inspiration, and he did sketchbook paintings while he was there and took those back to his studio in London and created oil paintings for his shows and for his buyers. So when I looked at those paintings, and certainly they were looked at in books, so I was looking at reproductions of them, but still the fluidity and the light bouncing off the water, that's it. I love those paintings, and they're tiny. They're 7 by 10 inches. And I found that the paintings that artists did primarily for themselves, for their own pleasure, going out and sitting in front of the subject and responding in the immediacy of the paint and the scene in front of the artist. Those are the things that I like better than their studio paintings, per se.
Yeah, sometimes, well, they get a bit more immediacy to them, right? And they get more feeling a lot of the time, because studio paintings, they can definitely be more, I guess, magnificent because of how much time and effort gets put into them.
Exactly.
But sometimes, between the time you start it and by the time you're finished with it, it's you lose something, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I said before, it's the watercolor just suited my lifestyle, and the immediacy is what I love, and the response, and then just trying to control it. It's an out of control medium, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. It's like anything. I say to my students, watercolor is just like life. Sometimes it's really messy, but beautiful things can happen. And I like that kind of watercolor metaphor for living, and just being able to create and live your life with, a knowledge that there's going to be a mess, but you'll be able to clean it up.
Interesting. And you said something earlier about being born male and 100 years ago. So tell us a little bit about your fascination with the sort of Edwardian era. Because
well, sort of Victorian. Well, my favorite author is Jane Austen. So you got to go back even to the Regency. But I've been an Anglophile all my life. Sargent is an American. He was born in Florence, Italy, but he spent most of his career in London painting the aristocrats. And Turner, of course, is British. And there's a handful of other British watercolorists who I love as well. So I think maybe I should have been born British. Actually, my grandmother was born in Bristol and immigrated when she was 6 months old. So that must be where I get it. In terms of being male, women at that time had certain roles in society, and not too many of them had the wherewithal to go out and do whatever they wanted. I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because I think living in our age is so much easier. Just thinking about clothing and how it was constructed and making food and all the things having to do with bathrooms. I wouldn't want any of that. I think modern plumbing is a miracle, and I'm perfectly happy with that. So by tongue-in-cheek, I think the art that I love was the art that was created then. And even Queen Victoria was a watercolorist, and she went out into Scotland and painted watercolors of her favorite scenes in Scotland. So I find some connection there. I think that's probably it.
Yeah, and that's pretty much true of me, and that's sort of why I gravitated to CLU. I guess, you, Michael Pierce, who was my oil painting mentor, and then we had, Bela Bacci and all those people that did this sort of really wonderful, like, old, when you say something's old, then people kind of turn up their nose at it, but a lot of these art techniques, while they're still around, a lot of the masters were from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that sort of thing. Yeah,
we're an interesting crowd there that has a big appreciation for representational art. Certainly I do as a landscape painter. I like space and light, and that's what I try and capture in my work. Although now at this sort of end of life, I have fewer years ahead than I've lived, and so now I'm kind of fulfilling a dream of a 12-year-old girl I always wanted a horse, and I really, really always wanted to do a horse show. And now I really want to be a dressage rider. So now I'm painting horses.
And I mean, it kind of goes, it all goes along with that sort of, you know, that era where obviously horses were a bigger deal back in that era, and, you know, our representational art and all those sorts of things. It is this sort of, you know, it's not so much being backwards as having a romanticism about the past while you know, taking in all the advantages and all the things that the modern world can offer.
Yeah, horses are really interesting because they used to be so much a part of civilization, doing things for mankind, moving us around, fighting in our wars. Not so much anymore. Most horses are a luxury, and what we do with them, you know, in sports is it's not something that is required in daily living. Our horsepower comes in motorized vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't need to ride to school and ride to the market or ride to the bar or whatever. It's not something that everybody can do. And I'm really, really grateful that I have the opportunity to do this. And I kind of make a joke about my writing career and why I wanted to do it, saying, you know, it's all about the clothes, because even the clothes that they wear in the dressage shows,
Yeah.
It used to be top hats. Now we all have to wear helmets to protect our heads, which is a really smart thing. But it used to be top hats and tails.
Can you wear a top hat on top of your helmet?
I know. It's like, and if I could wear a top hat, it would be great. The clothing fits my personality, and it is definitely something from a past era.
Yeah. You design costumes as well? Clothing?
I play around with making jackets and coats, and I'm working on embroidering jean jackets right now. And
oh gosh,
yeah, I'm
cool.
doing I do a lot of clothing things because my colleague Dr. Dru and I go to steampunk conventions. She's an author, a literary fictional author who has written steampunk fiction and gets invited to go to conventions, and so we go and we must dress up. So part of that Imagining Venice clothing stuff that you saw on when Harold put the photo up is part of our figuring out what to wear. Yes, it's all about the clothes.
And I guess, you know, speaking of the steampunk community, of course, that's another big community that's all about that romanticism of that turn of the century, but with, I don't know if you would call it modern technology, but a lot of times they have this sort of idea of advanced technology with, you know, gears and old steam engines.
And old steam stuff, yeah. And yeah. It's an amazing creative group of people. It also joins up with the maker community, do-it-yourself folks, just fascinating creative stuff that people put together, and some making a living at it, working in the movie industry. I've met people in props and in set construction who are steampunk aficionados. We also get you know, folks who are into sailing ships and into steam-powered ships and airplanes and all sorts of genres that kind of go onto sidelines off of that. So it's really fun to talk to these people and see what they've made and to be part of it.
All right, so we have one question on this show that we always ask our guests, and that is, what is the thing that you feel has given you the edge in life?
The edge. Wow. curiosity, I suppose, persistence, and, you know, I was kind of taken aback by the Facebook introduction of the show that said I was a famous artist.
What, aren't you? You are.
I'm famous in my head. No, it reminds me of a story. Back when my daughter was in elementary school, she was probably in first or second grade. One of the students, one of her friends asked her, "Well, is your mother a famous artist?" And she said, "Well, she's famous in Mammoth." So, yeah, I guess maybe I'm famous, but my fame was fleeting because I haven't worked in Mammoth for some years. But, yeah, I was probably known in Mammoth. But the whole fame thing, that's not part of my lexicon in life. I'm just living and trying to enjoy every day, especially now I'm going to be 64 in October, and I've still got too much to do. So I think the life edge is the fact that I love everything.
That's a pretty good edge.
And
For sure.
yeah, it's a problem because, those famous people, they kind of know when they're 5 years old what they want to do with their life, and then they can spend the next 50 years doing it. I kind of jump around and do a lot of stuff, and it's brought me some great experiences and some great career moves. And wonderful opportunities. So I think being a kind of a polyglot. What is a polyglot? Somebody who can't make up their mind about what they want to do and when they grow up. But now I want to be a dressage rider.
Great.
That's amazing.
You want to see my horse?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So here, let's see if we can
Oh
do
my
this.
gosh.
This is Roulette.
That's great.
I rescued Roulette, and he is a 17-hand warm blood, and we're trying to teach him to be a dressage horse, and he doesn't want to be one. So we'll see. But this is the work that will now be happening. I'm going to paint horses.
He has a different path in life for himself,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And horses are great to paint because they've got those muscles and they've got their hair that when they're
Flows around,
it
yes.
flows around perfectly, and just the way they move.
Yep. It's fun.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about the next stage of life.
That's so great.
All right.
What's the best way for people to get a hold of you if or do you want them to leave you alone?
Leave me alone so I can work. The best way for people to get hold of me is message me on Facebook, I imagine.
All right.
I don't know. Or go into the California Lutheran University directory, and I've got an email address on there, and you can email me.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks so much for coming in. It's been really great talking to you.
This was
And,
really fun.
Yeah, you got to come on again.
Explain a few
Sorry.
more things.
Yeah.
Like we said, like how many episodes will
Will it take to explore my entire life?
Keep doing more things, so it will just keep continuing, right?
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the whole MBA and the fact that I'm a cost accountant. So
We did not. Like I said, she does everything.
well, thank you guys for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Terry. And thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in and watching us here on Life Edge. We will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.